First, bottom up regulation of ecosystems. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, no? Cool. Awesome. All right, so we talked about this just a little bit, but I'm just going to provide a few more examples and touch on something a little bit more in depth today. So let's go ahead and start. So what are they? Well, top-down and bottom-up regulation are two key ideas that describe how ecosystems can be structured and organized. We talked about this trophic structure a few weeks ago, where we've got primary producers on the bottom, primary consumers that eat the primary producers, secondary consumers that eat the primary consumers, and so on and so forth up the food web. There's a few different ways these food webs can be organized. One is through the idea of bottom up. So this is where sort of the primary producers and the factors that limit these guys, pretty much at the bottom of the food chain, set the precedent for what happens and the ramifications throughout the food chain. So from the bottom upwards. Then you have this idea of top-down regulation or control, which refers to the idea that ecosystems are structured by factors that control death, like predation and disease. So this really occurs from the top down. So this is where predators like the quaternary consumers or the tertiary consumers, really whatever they do has a big influence on what goes down on the rest of the bottom of the food chain. So it's either the ecosystems get structured from bottom up, so it's primary producers, or top down, where the pretty much the predators or the quaternary consumers, whatever they do influences the rest of the ecosystem. And so this can be described through trophic cascades. So whatever primary producers, whatever they do, whatever nutrients they have that limits their population, that cascades throughout the rest of the food web. That is a bottom-up control. And then top-down is whatever behaviors the predators go on that influences the rest of the food chain. That's top-down control. All right. So here's a bottom-up regulation example. So the amount of nutrients in the water determines how much algae grows on the seagrass. So in this first photo here, we have these green blades of seagrass. Depending on how much algae is within the system and how many nutrients are there, this algae can then proliferate and grow on these seagrass blades. So all this dark kind of brown algae really suffocates seagrasses. How much algae is present on the seagrass determines how many grazers are on the seagrass. So these little guys like these shrimp and these snails and these nudibranchs, they all graze the brown algae or the epiphytic algae that's on the seagrass. And then of course, if you have more grazers, then you have more predators and so on and so forth. So in this case, the available nutrients are the resource used by the seagrass. So this is an example of bottom-up regulation, where the amount of nutrients really influence exactly how many grazers are there and then how many predators will eat the grazers. Next is you have top-down regulation. This could be seen through predation, primarily one of the strong factors. And in this case, you have a lake example where in lakes with large predatory fish like largemouth bass, they eat smaller fish. Smaller fish eat zooplankton, and zooplankton eat phytoplankton. And phytoplankton are really responsible for creating a lot of the algae blooms that we see in lakes or rivers, and even in the ocean as well. So without the top predators, there's no zooplankton, because all the small fish, they're just going crazy. Their populations are booming because there's no predators to eat the small fish, which means all the small fish are eating the zooplankton, which means there's nothing to check the phytoplankton. So in this case, we have this photo down here. In lakes without big fish, we see the lake is pretty cloudy, it's green, it's kind of murky. But with lakes with big fish, we see that the water is nice and crystal clear and blue. So by the fact that there are big predators in the system in the form of large fish, that has a cascading effect throughout the entire ecosystem. And really, you can see these big differences between these lakes here, one without big fish and one with big fish. Another example is disease. Disease is a big top-down regulator as well. Not as obvious as predation, of course, but definitely prevalent within certain ecosystems. So off the coast of California here, especially in Northern California and throughout Oregon and Washington and even up to Alaska, we've seen this disease called sea star wasting disease. And this is pretty much where sea stars will contract this virus and they pretty much just melt away. Like they physically just melt over time, and you can kind of see this in these photos. But starfish, they are actually one of the main predators within the California kelp system. So they eat these things called sea urchins. And so without these big predators, because of the sea star wasting disease, the sea urchin populations are left unchecked and they then proliferate themselves. So this is what we see in this case, where you have a nice healthy kelp forest system on the left with these huge strands of kelp. This is pretty much like an underwater forest, an underwater jungle. When sea stars are present, urchins tend to hide more and they tend to not eat as much. So you see this, the algae can then grow really, really tall because the sea stars are keeping the herbivores in check. Without the sea stars, you get this thing called a sea urchin barren, where now the sea urchins, they don't have any predators because they're all melted away from the disease. Their populations are left unchecked and they can come out and just do whatever they want. So they pretty much graze down the entire system. It's like turning a jungle into a desert, barren wasteland. So the sea stars, these predators have really big influence on the system here. And it's unfortunate that they've been hit so hard by the sea star wasting disease, causing their numbers to die off quite rapidly. Lastly, predators have a big influence on the system, not only through predation, but they can also have these things called trait-mediated indirect interactions. So this is another form of top-down control. So simply by being present, predators can change the behavior of their prey, resulting in ecosystem shifts or inducing a trophic cascade. Predators do not always have to eat their prey to influence the system. This is sort of the idea of landscape of fear. So simply by being around, prey will hide more, not move as much, change their behavior, change their physiology because they're afraid of getting eaten. And so this is an example from Australia where tiger sharks are the main predators in the system. But simply by fearing predation, sea turtles and dugongs, which graze on seagrasses, they move more. They don't stay in one place and just feed and feed and feed because they're afraid of getting eaten. So they move more and they hit different patches more readily. So they're constantly moving to try to avoid predation. This creates a more uniform seagrass meadow and leads to a healthier ecosystem overall. This is a really cool example over in Australia. So the tiger shark does not necessarily need to eat the sea turtle to have these implications throughout the ecosystem. Simply by just being around and perusing and kind of controlling these seagrass meadows, the sea turtles have a fear of getting eaten, so they move more readily, which is a really cool example of how predators can influence the system, not only by eating their prey, but also just by being around. So predators are extremely important and just another cool example of top-down regulation. That's all I have for this week. Do we have any questions on top-down, bottom-up regulation? I'm going to go into what's due next week. All right. So next week, you got your Zooniverse project. This is a project, citizen science project that you guys will be undertaking. What you're going to do is click the link and choose a biology-related project. I'm going to show you the website in a second here. So go ahead, go on this website, click the biology links, and there's I think like 46 different projects you could choose from. So what you're going to do is next week you turn this in a Word document. You're going to answer these following questions. 1, why you chose the project and what project did you choose, why you chose it, what made you interested in that project over the others, what's the goal of the project, how did you contribute to the project, what were your tasks, and then a daily report of what you did. Since it's due next week, you should have a minimum of 7 days. You could do multiple times a day if you want to, but definitely a minimum of 7 days of activities and tasks for this project. So what this is, I'll show you on the website right now. So you have this Zooniverse. This is what the actual website looks like, the Zooniverse, and there's a bunch of different projects. So what you want to do is you want to choose a project related to biology, and then you can see there's a ton of different projects here that you can go and do. 3 whole pages worth. So let's say we want to do this Oceanized one. What you're going to do here is you're going to identify and go through photos to look at different fish. You'll do a little tutorial on it. And so do you see a fish in this image? No, you don't. Go on and go next. Pretty simple stuff, but this is just a citizen science project that you guys can do. So like I said, there's a ton of different projects. So go ahead next week, turn in a Word document answering those questions, and then choose a fun little project that you guys want to do. You can do stuff about frogs, whales, bird nests, everything biology related. So any questions on that? You guys are good to go. That's all I got for you guys today.